So, this part we will talk about risk management tools and how countries in Europe, we will focus on the European Union, will support and actually support the ex ante strategy to transfer risk by several tools that also the common agricultural policy since last decades put in place to support farmers to manage risk. Before that, we will carry on a very brief summary on the path that common agricultural policy moved from the early stage in 1960 of the previous cycle, and we will arrive step by step at the actual version of the common agricultural policy that today put in place and give in the availability of the farmers several strategy and a strong support to risk management tools. So first of all, we know that common agricultural policy was born at a particular historical moment, namely after the conclusion of the Second World War, which represented probably today the greatest catastrophe ever experienced by human civilization as a result of war. It was therefore a particular moment in which evidently there was a need for peace, including concrete political action between the countries that had founded the European Economic Community, so before the actually European Union. From this perspective, the common agricultural policy can be understood almost as a sort of political, economic, and social compensation that especially West Germany, so we're talking on the before the Union, now from West and East Germany, guaranteed to the other countries of the community. Firstly, France, for the atrocity of the previous year. So the common agricultural policy aims to provide safe, affordable food for Europeans, ensure a fair living for farmers, stabilize markets, support rural area, but we will see in very short words in the following slide what we are meaning for that. So we know that while self-sufficiency was not a formally objective aims in the Treaty of Rome, it was in effect the core underlying motivation and a key political goal of the common agricultural policy at its inception, so from the origin of the policy. The formal objective stated in the Article 39 of the treaty was to assure the availability of supplies, so the food security in short terms, as in the post-World War II context of food shortage and supply and vulnerability, achieving self-sufficiency was considered the practical method to guarantee this availability for the new European Economic Community's member states. So the initial implementation of the CAP, which includes guaranteed high price, market intervention, as we will see later, was a direct result of policy designed with the implicit aim of the self-sufficiency, with of course, aiming to ensure food security for European citizens that experienced in the years before the atrocity of the World War II. So the establishment of a common market was the principal economic aims of the Treaty of Rome in 1957, which founded the European Economic Community. This objective was intended to foster economic cooperation, growth, and stability among the six founding member states, Belgium, France, Germany, Italy, Luxembourg, and Netherlands, in a way to prevent future conflict through economics interdependence. So the key provision for the common market were free movement of goods, so the abolition of custom duty, tariff, and quantitative restriction in terms of quota on import and export between member states. This was achieved relatively quickly with a custom union established in 1968, ahead of schedule. The free movement of persons, of course workers as including persons, allowing citizens from member states to move freely to live and work in other member states. Free movement of service, enabling company and individuals to provide service across borders within the common market without facing national restriction. And the free movement of capital, which permitting the free flow of investment and payments between member countries. The Treaty of Rome, in the origin, established the common agriculture policy with core objective that we could summarize in the increasing the productivity, ensuring fair farmer income, stabilizing market, guaranteeing food supply, providing reasonable consumer prices. These goals, that are still centrally today, aim to balance the economics and social needs for both producers and consumers. So keep in mind that this kind of framework of the common agricultural policy since the origin emphasize two aspects. The first aspect is that common agricultural policy could be identified with the actual European Union. So common agricultural policy born with European Union. This was the European Economic Community in 1960. The second aspect is that for primary sector, common agricultural policy determine the risk profile for European farmers, because as we will see in short time, we will show that the intervention and the overall framework of the public support to farmers get common agricultural policy warrant to farmers determine the revenue risk profile of sector and region in Europe. So the 5 core objectives of the CAP as originally outlined in Article 39 of the Treaty of Rome, and are basically the increasing of agricultural productivity by promoting technical progress and ensuring the optimum use of the production factor, particularly labor, to ensure a fair standard of living for the agricultural community. Of course, farmers are included in this community, stabilize markets, to assure the availability of supplies, and this is strictly linked to the concept of food security, to ensure that supply reach consumers at reasonable prices. So these objectives were designed to guarantee food security for a post-war Europe while also supporting the economic viability of the farming sector. So while the CAP has been reformed over the years to include the broader environmental rural development goals, these 5 original objectives remain the foundational basis of the policy. So keep in mind these 5 core objectives of the CAP when we will hear debate on the CAP post 2027, because as we have pointed out before, the common agricultural policy would represent in concrete the essential of the European Union. So the implementation of the common agricultural policy during the 1960s was defined by establishing core market support mechanisms aimed to achieving food security, ensuring a fair income for farmers. And the key aspects of its implementation were 1962, the birth of the CAP, following the negotiation of the Council of Ministers agreed on the fundamental principle and the first specific market organization for products such as cereals, eggs, poultry meat, fruits, vegetable, big meat. Then, following the 3 main principles was based on the unity of the market, so ensuring the free movement, as we pointed out before, of agricultural product within the European economic community. The community preference, so protecting the internal EU market with a common external tariff on import. Financial solidarity, creating the European agricultural guidance and guarantee food. To finance the policy centrally from the community budget. The mechanism that was set and implemented to pursue the 3 main principles that we put on the table were market intervention and price support. So the core mechanism involved providing farmers with guaranteed high prices for their produce, which was paid for through the community budget. If market price fell, the European community would intervene to buy the surplus, ensuring income stability for farmers. So keep in mind that this kind of intervention, in fact, abolish the question related to the price volatility on the global market, because we have a substantial stability of the price for farmers. The phase rollout could be, in short, described while the policy was agreed upon 1962, the common market for all major crop products was implemented gradually, step by step, throughout the decades, with the full system for the key products like dairy, beef, coming up by the mid-1968. The guarantee price system strongly incentivized increased production, so this aspect led to significant increases in productivity and contributed to surpluses for the years that's coming. The CAP provides, of course, a wide range of benefits that extended to farmers, consumers, and in broader terms, rural economy in European Union. The main benefit for farmers in rural area could be identified in the fact that policy ensure a stable, abundant, and secure supply of good quality and safe. Stable and fair income for farmers and a very broad support of for rural economy because CAP support a very push for innovation and foster productivity in farmers and rural area. So summarizing the first phases of implementation of the CAP, we could say that government aid, of course, farmers, and of course, public support that common agricultural policy warrant to European Union, or at least the six member states that starts the economic community in 1960 varied slightly among countries because we know France have an agricultural structure, agricultural specificity that are very different from Italy, from Germany. So the fact that common agricultural policy strongly support the dairy sector would have very different impact among European countries. But the basic point was that common agricultural policy foster a lot on the productive improvement because the coupled the support and so on. And this led on the strongly effect on foster mechanization, though, that has as a result an higher yields and producer an higher amount of production in the European countries that in very short terms become one of the most exporter for agricultural products around the world. So this policy, this sense, stimulated a significant transformation of European agriculture, and we have, in terms of productivity gains, the output in the European Union rose by almost 3% annually between 1960 and 1973. So farmers widely adopted the new technology, machinery, chemical, fertilizer, and more generally high-yielding crop variety. Of course, the common agricultural policy have has huge effect in terms of structure, since the policy effectively incentivizes the modernization of farm structure, leading to the consolidation of land into larger, more efficient units, and an exodus of labor from the agricultural sector in other industry. No? So after few years of implementation of common agricultural policy, we experienced in the European countries, so in the countries that are there at the European community, the migration phenomena due to the higher in productivity. The European community rapidly achieved the near self-sufficiency in many key food products that were at least one of the core post-war goals of the Treaty of Rome. Farmer income stabilized and rose significantly relative to industrial wage during this period, addressing another of the key aims of the Treaty of Rome. Anyway, the Common Agricultural Policy faced significant crises in the following years, especially in 98, primarily stemming from its own success in achieving food security through market price support. And the main crises were due to the fact that we have a downward trend of agricultural prices because the very, very intensive hiking in productivity. So the higher productivity of European farmers generated a downward trend of agricultural prices, and then this have a negative impact on the farmers' revenue. So one of the reasons for the lag in income in the countryside was due to the downward trend of agricultural price, as we just point out. It was due to the fact that the demand for food was and is relatively income inelastic. So this means that although income grew very quickly because of economic growth in the industrialized world, people did not use their higher income to buy more food, but they utilized higher income to buy other higher value commodity. So few products were in much greater demand, such as meat. In fact, we specified in the part 1 of this model that actually we are experiencing a very, very higher in meat demand because China and India, Korea are growing very rapidly. But this is a very, very particular phases of their economic growth because they are shifting from a very, very poor food behavior. So that we say, you know, the Chinese that made rice done, they are shifting in a very early stage in the transition, a very, very poor economic condition to a higher revenue, so that at this stage the impact of growing revenue affected heavily the demand. But when the economy reach a higher step or level, then when we have in a growing income, this share of income will be devoted to buy products that are not origin in the primary sector. So while the Common Agricultural Policy mechanism ensured stable market price generally above world levels, because we say before that Common Agricultural Policy set a internal price level at the European Union that were in some cases much higher than the world levels. The overall financial situation for many farmers was challenging due to several factors. The first one, while prices were supported, input costs like fertilizers, machinery, were also high, and this eventuality is squeezing the profit margin for farmers. Following, most important, we have the overproduction phenomena that guarantee prices lead to chronic overproduction, requiring expensive intervention in terms of storage, the export subsidy. So this massive surplus eventually pressured the system and lead, as we will see in short, to policy changes like the introduction of milk quota. The high inflation during the early 80s eroded the purchasing power of nominal incomes, meaning that in real terms farmers were earning less. Many farmers, particularly those who invested heavily in land and equipment during the first prosperous phases of the CAP, found themselves heavily in debt when interest rate increased and commodity prices eventually decreased, linked to increasing productivity. So the benefit of price support tended to favor larger, more efficient farms with higher output, while smaller farms often struggled with lower incomes and were more vulnerable to financial stress. So the period of the 80s was marked by high volatility and financial hardship for many, leading to a significant number of farmers that live in the sector and foster structural changes toward larger farms. For example, for wheat, the European prices were from the beginning of the Common Agricultural Policy higher by a considerable extent than prices in North America, Australia, Argentina. So that for meat and more generally for dairy products, many European products were competitive. So the effect of the protection was much slight. So there was a paradox here for wheat and cereals where the crops for which demand was most stringent. By protecting them, the governments were in effect encouraging surpluses and discouraging shifting to other crops. So this kind of distortion of the free market was greater in the countries which produce a large quantity of cereal, such as France, Germany, and much less prominent in countries where agriculture was heavily geared to specialized dairy products, such as in Netherlands. So the first attempt to solve agricultural product through integration. So what went wrong in the CAP evolution, the CAP pattern, after 2 decades of implementation? In addition to the poor increase in small farmers' revenue that we say that which generates migration from rural area, the massive overproduction, the surpluses in production generated by the guaranteed prices, encouraged farmers to maximize production, leading persistent massive surpluses, and this became famously known as the butter mountains, wine lakes, now beef mountains, so that the European Economic Community was obligated now to buy and store their exits or sell them of the world market at the greatly reduced prices. So this eventuality generate an escalation in the budgetary costs. So storing, disposing of the enormous surpluses become too expensive for economic community. So through 97 and 1980, the CAP consumed a disproportionate amount of the total European Community budget. So just about 80% of the overall budget of the European Community was devoted to the CAP functioning. Often this rising financial burden led to a constant budgetary crisis and an intense political disagreement among member states about funding the primary sector. So this eventuality led a path of common agricultural policy reform, and jointly on the budgetary costs and financial question linked to the CAP implementation, we have also to underline the environmental concerns that are linked to the higher productivity that was incentivized by the CAP support in the first version of the CAP support, because the production focused of the common agricultural policy started to raise a very significant environmental concern. So in this context, one of the first action, one of the first policy reforms were the introduction of quotas, introduction of tariff, and to pay attention at what consumers think about primary sector quality, primary sector products in terms of safety, and more generally, we started to focus, to pay attention also in the political terms of the birth of the concept of multifunctionality in agriculture, which means to consider farmers not only the economic agents that are devoted to produce uh, food, no, throughout agri-food supply chain, but farmers are also the economic agents that could preserve environment, that could protect biodiversity, that could ensure no high quality in production and so on. So, very short, if we would summarizing the historical stream of the development of this common agricultural policy, we could um, look at the crisis in the 80s now that emphasized before, the surpluses, financial crisis, environmental externality, negative environmental externality, linked to the overproduction. And the first step of the reform could be identified in McSherry reform in 1992, that aiming to reduce its surpluses, to protect environment, and to stabilize budget, introducing quota, introducing set aside, and so on. With Agenda 2000, the focus shifts more on the competitiveness, the rural development, and on the burn of the concept of multifunctionality that we stated before. The more incisive reform were the reform in 2003, namely the fishery reform, that would introduce a very, very innovative model of the public support to the European farmers. And this pattern was reinforced in the health check in 2008, where the new challenges, especially the climate change challenges, were incorporated in the common agricultural policy. For the first time, the CAP start to talk about risk management. So we spent this first part of this presentation to emphasize the role of the public support granted to the farmers, the European farmers, by the CAP, in a way to emphasize the role of the common agricultural policy in the shaping the farmer's risk profile, no? So the elimination of the price risk was very important also for the building of the tools. It's not a case that until the beginning of the 2000 years we witnessed the presence in the tools that foresee the transfer of the risk or only of the crop insurance, because the part of the market risk was in the past, in fact, eliminated by the support of the common agricultural policy. So the context of the 2003 reforms was very variegated, because we know that especially France was opponent respect of the view, no, of the reforms of the CAP, that looking at decoupled payments and incorporation of the common agricultural policy of other and supplement objective, like reinforcement of rural development, the environmental aspect linked to farmers' activity, and so on. So if we would divide now the basic block, the opponents of the member states, we could look at Germany, UK, Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden as member states that support the reform. Meanwhile, we have the Mediterranean area, added Ireland and Luxembourg, that were against the new vision of the reform, the fishery reform in 2003. So we could summarize that the fishery reform was a fundamental shift in the history of the CAP, because it introduced a new system of direct payments, largely decoupled from the production. No? So the main elements of this reform were the introduction of the single farm payment, that represented a central innovation in the farming support, because replacing most production-linked subsidy with a single area-based payment for farmers. This payment was based, of course, on historical payments received between 2000 and 2002, but the aims of this idea was to make farmers responsive to market demands rather than policy incentive. No? This is a clear message for farmers. You have to produce what you think would be more profitable for you, not depending on the incentive that public support could guarantee you. The other aspect, which is very important to tackle the question linked to the environment, was the cross-compliance, because to receive the payment, farmers were required to adhere to a range of standards relating to the environment, food safety, animal health, welfare, and so on. Other question was basic in this reform was the concept of modulation, that was a mechanism introduced to reduce the direct payment for larger farms and try to transfer this fund to the second pillar of the CAP, which focus on rural development policy in a way to increase the public incentive to the question linked to the quality of the products and the environmental externality that are linked to the farming activity. The fishery reform further reduced the guaranteed intervention prices for some commodity, such as milk and butter, rice, no? In a way to align the supported price in the EU with forward market prices in a way to improve the competitiveness of European farmers and the memory of the past, introducing a financial discipline in a way the strict budgetary ceiling were introduced for in a way to limit it, the farmer support expenditure. Some years later, the health check in 2008, so 5 years later, was a package of targeted amendments, no? Designed to fine tune the major basic elements that fishery reform introduced in the 2003. So it was not a fundamental reform itself, but it aimed to make the existing single payment scheme simpler, more efficient, and so on. So key measure introduced by the health checks were the abolition of compulsory set aside, so the requirement for farmers to leave 10% of their land was eliminated, allowing them to respond more flexibly now to market demand. The reform moved to standardize and fully decouple most remaining production-linked payment from actual output. Increase in modulation, so funds were transferred from direct payment to the rural development budget, and this provided more financial resources to help the transition of the agricultural sector in a way to tackle the new challenges: climate change, weather management, renewable energy, biodiversity, and so on. The abolition of milk quota that completely ended in April 2015. So, following the 2014 reform of the Common Agricultural Policy represented the programming period 2014-2020, aimed to strengthen the policy competitiveness, sustainability, and fairness of the CAP. The key elements of the 2014 CAP reform were essentially the greening of the direct payment. It was a very major new element because 30% of member states' direct payment budgets was tied to mandatory environmental friendly farming practices. So crop diversification, maintaining permanent grassland, ecological focus area, and so on. So the new architecture for direct payments was structured focusing on basic payment schemes, so that the coupled single farm payments was building around the basic payment scheme with shift from historical payments introduced by Fischler towards more a uniform flat rate payments per hectare across and within member states. So this mechanism was introduced in a way to flatten the difference among sectors, among countries in the European Union. In the direct payments was introduced the young farmers mandatory. So member states were required to provide an additional payment for farmers under 40 years old for a maximum of 5 years to encourage generational renewal. Redistributive payment options were introduced and was identified also the definition of active farmers. So were introduced tighter rules to ensure that payments went only to genuine farmers. In terms of second pillar, more funds were transferred to the second pillar by a mandatory reduction, the modulation introduced by Fischler, of the direct payments. So rural development programs were focused on 6 key priorities, including climate change action, innovation, and competitiveness, with specific minimum spending requirement for environmental measure. That was the way that European Union found in a way to force each member state to pursue the objective of ensure the European Union more respect for environmental biodiversity and so on. In terms of the market measure, the reform continued to shift toward market-oriented approach, confirming the end of milk quota, sugar quota, and also a crisis reserve was established to provide emergency support during severe market disturbance. So this was the first time in the European Union and inside the Common Agricultural Policy that the question of crisis, the question linked to disaster due to extreme weather events were introduced for the first time in an organic way in the second pillar of the CAP. So, if we wish to summarize the Common Agricultural Policy between 2014 and 2020, we could identify 3 main challenges: economics, environmental, territorial. These 3 challenges follow the policy objective. So viable food production still remain one important task for the economics challenges, but policy objective linked to the environmental and territorial challenges become more and more important. So the objective of sustainable management of natural resource climate action become even more important, and also the question of the balanced territorial development, answering the question that the new member state that coming in the European Union in the recent years. So the overall reform objective of the CAP, this programming time, were to enhance competitiveness, improve sustainability, and foster on innovation. This is an expansion of the challenges that we see before. So in terms of economic challenges, the most challenges were the food security, the price variability, and the management of the economic crisis. So as you can see, the economic challenges are completely different from the past, because for the first time price variability was feeling and perceived as a relevant risk for the economic resilience of European farmers. At the same time, the economic crisis, as a consequence, the meteorological extreme events as were perceived also as risky. In terms of the environmental challenges, we have the question of the soil depletion, water and air quality, the biodiversity, GHG emission. So we start to witness that the European transition towards to the Green Deal of the European Union. No? So an economics, a policy and a social transition to and support a vision that was more respectful for the environment and for the new challenges that are in our future. So in the post-2023 Green Deal has been identified with the green growth. So the Common Agricultural Policy is still a central tool for achieving the ambition of the European Green Deal and the related strategies such as the farm to fork and biodiversity strategy. So the current Common Agricultural Policy program has been, in a way, modernized to align with the Green Deal's goal of making the European Union the first climate neutral continent by 2050. The key alignment mechanism and benefit could be identified in a new green architecture that integrate environmental and climate objective into everyday farming practice and funding rule in a way to enhance the conditionality by introducing a new mandatory component for member states, the eco schemes, which must dedicate at least 25 of their direct payment budget to these voluntary schemes. At least 35 funds for rural development measures are allocated to initiatives supporting climate action, biodiversity enhancement, and targets. And each member state must design a national CAP strategic plan that demonstrates an higher environmental climate ambition than in the previous period aligned with the EU-wide environmental legislation, the Green Deal target. And the Common Agricultural Policy needs to help us achieve concrete targets set out in the farm to fork and biodiversity strategy, including reducing pesticide and fertilizer use, improving animal welfare, and so on. So what we could summarize and consider from this pattern of the Common Agricultural Policy and for the European vision respected in new challenges is that meanwhile the world started in the last 2 decades to ask more food, more production, European Union start to consider more relevant aspects and attributes different from production. This is very, very crazy in some words, some terms, because of course European farmers are exposed at risk never seen before in terms of climate, never seen before in terms of market volatility, but they cannot tackle this kind of question with the uh, strategic and usual uh, behavior that they could use, no, in a way to increase productivity and economic resilience. Because the target of the Farm to Fork and biodiversity strategy, for example, avoid farmers to use more fertilizer, more pesticide, but in this way we have that European crop production could be more risky in terms of the new climatic trends. So the strategy objective of the European Union and the Common Agricultural Policy in reduce chemical pesticide, reduce the use, nutrition, loss, fertilizer, reduce antimicrobial elements, and so on, could conflict with the new challenges that European farmers have to face in the future decades. So, this is a very, very ambitious programs, and look forward for European Union in terms of to guarantee a more sustainable primary sector that look are to be more respectful for environment, more respectful for animal health, more respectful for biodiversity, but we have to take in account that economics aspects are still one of the key aspects for the farmers' resilience in rural area. And this aspect is not sure that would are guaranteed in the future by subsidizing crop insurance and or mutual fund participation.